Welcome back to another Explainer. I am so excited for this one. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating piece of research by Thomas Philip Madison and Lance V. Porter. We are going to explore exactly what is going on in our brains long after the credits roll on our favorite television shows. Specifically, we'll be breaking down the cognitive and imagery attributes of what researchers call parasocial relationships. So let me ask you a question right off the bat. Have you ever found yourself doing the dishes and suddenly you're arguing with a TV character in your head? Or maybe you've pictured yourself stepping right into a scene to fix a conflict. Okay, I'll admit it, I have spent an embarrassing amount of time mentally giving medical advice to Dr. House. I was completely convinced I could solve the case. We all do this kind of thing, but why? Here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at the TV everywhere era, compare real life to parasocial dynamics, talk about measuring our imaginations, explore retroactivity and variety, and finally discuss testing the waters and constructing our own reality. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the TV everywhere era. You know, our media landscape has shifted drastically since the early days of cable back in the 80s. The media scholar W. James Potter hit the nail on the head back in 2004 when he said, "We live in an environment that is far different than any environment humans have ever experienced. We are all saturated with information." Think about that for a second. With Netflix, Hulu, and smartphones constantly in our pockets, data actually shows we spend more of our leisure time engaging with television than we do communicating with actual real-life humans. Crazy, right? And this saturated landscape, well, it's not just vast, it is incredibly morally complex. We aren't just watching simple good guys and bad guys anymore. Instead, we're following highly competent but completely cold antiheroes like Dr. Gregory House. We're watching good people make absolutely terrible choices like Walter White. And we see violent, ruthless characters dealing with everyday, relatable family panic attacks. Think Tony Soprano. This deep complexity fundamentally changes how our brains interact with and process these characters. Moving right along to Section 2, real life versus parasocial. To really understand what's happening here, Madison and Porter rely on a concept from interpersonal communication called imagined interactions, or IIs for short. At its core, this is basically a fancy term for a specific kind of daydreaming. It's when we mentally rehearse conversations with real people in our lives to build up internal scripts for how we might behave. We're trying to anticipate how that other person is going to respond. You know exactly what I mean? We all do this right before a big job interview or a really difficult conversation. Now, on the flip side, we have parasocial relationships, or PSRs. These are those one-sided relationships we develop with television personas. But here's the thing. Just like real friendships, these parasocial relationships require actual imaginative work from us to flourish. And they endure way, way beyond that single 45-minute exposure of an episode. So the core mission of Madison and Porter's study was brilliant. They took the established psychological scales used to measure imagined interactions with real people, and they adapted them to measure our parasocial relationships with mediated TV personas. Basically, they wanted to know, do we daydream about fictional TV characters the exact same way we daydream about the real people in our lives? Which brings us to Section 3, measuring our imaginations. How do you even measure a daydream? Well, the researchers surveyed 250 mass communication students and adapted 6 key attributes. They looked at frequency, which is how often you think about a persona; retroactivity, thinking back to past scenes; variety, imagining multiple characters in different situations; valence, meaning how pleasant the interaction is; self-dominance, like are you doing most of the talking in your head; and finally, specificity, which is the actual level of detail in your imagery. Now for the results in Section 4, retroactivity and variety. They wanted to see what actually predicts how frequently fans imagine interacting with media characters, and the results were crystal clear. Retroactivity was massive, scoring a 0.51. Variety came next at 0.24. Meanwhile, attributes like self-dominance or valence, they barely registered as predictors at all. Let's look a bit closer at that 0.51 for retroactivity, because this is a massive finding. It tells us that to engage frequently with a character, we heavily rely on retroactively thinking back to actual scenes we've watched. We aren't just pulling random scenarios out of thin air. Instead, we're taking the specific scenes provided by the show's producers, and then we're layering our own imaginative input right on top of them. We mull over the dialogue, the choices, the outcomes. It's like a mental playground. And that 0.24 for variety is equally fascinating. The sheer diversity of today's complex TV shows gives us so much raw material to imaginatively engage with. We aren't just fixating on one single hero anymore. We imagine multiple characters in a huge variety of circumstances, constantly testing out endless different mental paths. That perfectly sets up Section 5, Testing the Waters. This leads us to the real bulldog inside of the paper, the true why behind all of this intricate imaginative work for people who literally do not exist. The researchers realized these aren't just lonely delusions, they are highly functional. Engaging in these parasocial imagined interactions actually provide us with a safe environment to develop and refine internal cognitive scripts for our daily lives. We use these daydreams for rehearsal, for emotional catharsis, and for building a much deeper self-understanding of our own personal viewpoints. And honestly, this is exactly why those complex anti-heroes we talked about earlier are so important. Practicing conflicts with morally ambiguous characters like Walter White or Tony Soprano lets us safely test the waters. We can test out our own moral compasses, figure out where we stand on really tricky issues, and rehearse our reactions to bad behavior, all entirely without any real-world consequences. Television provides the sandbox, but our imaginations build the castles. Finally, Section 6. Constructing our own reality. For the longest time, critics argued that television just made us passive couch potatoes, that we just sat there while producers dictated our reality to us. But Madison and Porter's findings prove the exact opposite. Our strong parasocial retroactivity proves that viewers use TV merely as a starting point. We take that raw material and actively add our own imaginative input, effectively making us active co-creators of our social worlds. We're actively participating in the construction of reality, long after we turn the screen off. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative question to chew on the next time you catch yourself daydreaming about a TV show. If we really are using media as the raw material to write the internal scripts for our real world's behavior, who is really writing the script of your life? You or the media you consume? Think about that. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.